Welcome to Hometown Happenings. I'm Carol McCarthy here in the forest of Tamarac, along with Kelly Blackledge, who's a ranger here out at Tamarac Wildlife Refuge. And Kelly, today, why are we in the woods and what are we going to see?
We are exploring worms today, which are non-native species. In fact, there are no terrestrial worms in Minnesota that are native, and they have invaded our forests. So it does make a challenge when we're managing our forests and also managing for habitat for wildlife.
All right, so today we're going to look at an area that you have worms in every area, but
we do, yeah. Unfortunately, worms have spread nearly throughout the refuge, and it has changed some of the habitat on the refuge because of the impact that these worms have in the soil. And there are a lot of different worms. There are about 15 species that have come into Minnesota. They were originally from Asia or Europe that came generally with potted plants. When people brought plants over, they were in the soil. And then, of course, they've spread even faster because of our fishing activities and use as angle worms, and those being dumped on the shore or out in the woods, thinking you're freeing the worms. Really, you're increasing the spread of these invasive species.
So there were no worms to begin with way back when in Minnesota?
There could have been before the glaciers, but they wouldn't have survived the glaciers. So, and worms spread pretty slowly if they're not moved by humans and introduced into our woods, then they're moving more quickly. But, you know, a worm like this is not going to move too quickly. So, but we certainly have worms in these forests, and there's been a lot of fishing that's happened around Tamarac for a lot of years. So,
all right, so we're going to do some worm extraction today, I understand.
That's right. We're going to extract some of the worms from the soil using a mustard extraction that'll bring the worms up to the surface.
Right. So are you in the business of moving worms from location to location and just kind of confining them, as it were?
Not really. You know, that would be a pretty expensive project. Again, they are all over, and just getting the worms to come to the surface so that you could collect them would be difficult. So one of the things that the worms do is that they change the leaf litter in the forest. Normally in a northern Minnesota woodland forest, it should be pretty squishy ground here. I don't know, what do you think? Is it? It's a little squishy, but yeah. So there should be a really nice top layer of leaf litter, and that's where our young plants grow. The ferns that you see around us, the wildflowers, rely on that leaf litter. Even our frogs that hibernate, the wood frogs that hibernate there in the wintertime, need that thick leaf litter on the top. And worms are really good at breaking it down, so they break it down very quickly. More quickly than the plants around us can absorb the nitrites that are released from that breaking down or decomposition of the leaf litter. So it happens so quickly. In fact, as you know, worms burrow. They dig holes, and those holes make great places for rainwater to wash those nitrates down away from the plants, called leaching. So we lose a lot of the nitrates and nitrites in our soils that would naturally be there.
So, but worms don't get rid of mosquitoes or flies, do they?
No.
Okay.
We need our dragonflies and bats. And
so could we like grab a pile of worms and throw them at our neighbor's yard so they don't have to blow their leaves?
That would take a while. It's not quite that quickly, but it does happen fast.
Okay, so today we're standing in the area, of course, where we've got lots of ferns and lots of the leaves that you were talking about. And then the second half of the show, we're going to go to an area where there isn't so much.
That's right. You'll definitely feel a little bit harder soil because it has been compacted without that leaf litter, and has been difficult for some of our native plants to grow. You know, we won't see the jack-in-the-pulpit and trillium and things like that in an area where you have a lot of worms working away.
Here with Kelly Blackledge at Tamarac National Wildlife Refuge. We're talking worms today. And what kind of worms actually do you have right there?
That's good. There are 3 different types of worms. There are the epigeic worms, which are on the top layer. They kind of work on that litter layer. The endogeic worms, which are in the top soil layer. And then the anessic worms that dig really deep. Those are your night crawlers that go deep into the soil. So those 3 primary worms, and so the smaller ones are generally in fact, there are really tiny ones too that are in the leaf litter layer. So these are mostly endogeeic.
So these worms that you have in your hand right now, they survive our Minnesota winters, or they go deeper underground under the frozen earth?
Yes, they can survive. They go pretty deep underground. Yep. So it's not until spring and those spring rains that bring them out.
Robins.
Yeah. Yeah, are happy then. Yeah. And there are a lot of wildlife certainly that eat worms. Robins, a lot of our birds, woodcock, that survive on this. It provides a food source, whereas otherwise they would have been feeding on caterpillars or insects, other types of insects, and now there's a lot of worms available for them to eat. And by the way, these are young worms.
How can you tell?
You can tell because there is no collar around these worms. Usually you see kind of a collar around it, and that would indicate that it's an adult worm. And it is spring, so we're probably going to see mostly juvenile worms.
All right, I'm here with Kelly Blackledge at Tamarac National Wildlife Refuge. We're going to take a quick break and be back with more Hometown Happenings after this. Welcome back to Hometown Happenings. Kelly Blackledge here with me in the forests of Tamarac National Wildlife Refuge. Now we're in a different location.
We are. This is north of Tamarac Lake. Tamarac Lake has been fished a long time, and you can see there's not as much vegetation through these forests. It's a lot more open, no ferns or wildflowers like we had in the past woods.
All right. So what do we have here?
Well, let's take a sample of these woods and the worms that are here.
Okay.
So I'm just going to scrape away the leaves so that we can get the soil exposed. And you can see there's not much leaf litter here before we hit the soil. We should be seeing a lot of broken up leaves on the ground. Little tiny pieces of leaves, and there's just very little. This is a plot that we would use to sample forest areas, and this solution is a mustard solution that's about 1/3 dry yellow mustard and water. So I'm just going to pour it right into the soil. Soak it really good.
Why do you use mustard?
This is an irritant to the worms, and it'll help bring these worms out of the ground. The first worms that'll come up will be those endogeeic and epigeic worms. And then as it soaks further and further down, the anessic worms, those big night crawlers, will start to come up.
About how long does it take for this? I mean, is this a guaranteed solution to bring up the worms, to extract the worms?
Yeah, you can't do it in an area that's compacted like a park that's mowed and walked on a lot, or a trail. We can't do it right in the middle of the trail. This soil is fairly loose so that it does allow the mixture to soak in.
And why do you go through this whole process of extracting worms? And why is it so important to know more about worms?
Well, here we're getting the density of worms in this forest, so we can compare it with other parts of the refuge, and that does help us to determine what the makeup of that forest, what type of animals then are able to survive, or the vegetation that can grow in this area.
Well, it looks like you've got your work cut out for you here with the worms, Kelly.
Yes, a lot of worms on the refuge.
Right. And it's been an interesting day here in the forest of the Tamarac National Wildlife Refuge. Kelly Blackledge, along with the worms. For TV3, I'm Carol McCarthy.